Oh, hey. Just taking a little look around the neighborhood here. We had an uninvited guest blow through this week. Literally, Hurricane Michael came through, and the eye of the storm hit about 120 miles away from here. So we came through it fairly well, but our little town did get sideswiped by the winds. But fortunately, this pile of leaves and limbs you see behind me is about all the damage we sustained here on our property. You know, hurricanes can be really destructive, as can tornadoes and earthquakes. And you may never go through anything like that. But maybe you're facing a personal storm, figuratively speaking. Like hurricanes, you know, we do have some warning that they're coming. We know on radar where they're going, and we can track them. Maybe on your horizon you can see that the job situation over the next year or so isn't that great, and you might be looking at a layoff. On the other hand, things like earthquakes can hit anytime, any place with no warning. And maybe while you're going home one day, you have an earthquake hit with no warning as you're going through an intersection and you get T-boned by a car going the other way. How do we deal with these things? Well, they can either drive us away from the Lord or draw us closer. And that's what we're going to look at today out of 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Hey, as we've always said, if you're not careful, you might just learn something before we're done. So let's get started. Oh, and just to be sure, you're an invited guest today.
Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory.
Well, whenever we have something like what happened this week with Michael paying us a visit, provides us with a good object lesson, doesn't it? And not only that, but whenever something like a storm, like a hurricane hits, inevitably, I don't know about y'all, but I get questions from people about why these kinds of things happen. And there's been some Facebook chatter about that that's come across my news feed. Generally from Bible skeptics. Now, there's several different ways that you can approach this idea about why things like storms happen. There's the scientific, we do have laws that govern the universe physically that state these things happen. But I'm not going to get into that aspect of it, but I want to get into it from a different aspect of it. And look, first of all, at the question up here about your anchor holding in the storms of life, because even if you never go through a hurricane, we all have our own personal storms of life we go through when things aren't quite going our way. And what I want to give today is not necessarily the absolute definitive answer as to how to handle these things or why they happen, but it is an answer. It is an answer that maybe you can use if folks ask you why these kinds of things happen, because this is the time really to prepare for the storms of life before they happen, so that you can be prepared. A lot of people right now are probably not thinking about it, but in a month or two you might need that furnace kicked on. And then you go to flip the switch and it's not working. This might be the time now while the weather's still nice to get that taken care of. When do you need to get homeowners insurance or renter's insurance? It's before the fire. Yeah, I've been in the insurance business, and I would have people call, hey, I got a speeding ticket yesterday. Can you write me a policy that was effective the day before? Oh, no, I can't do that. any more than you can get homeowners after the house is burned down. We can prepare for storms of life before they come. And that is the best thing to do, to be prepared. You know, we still have about 6 weeks left in the Atlantic hurricane season. And we know that storms can hit any time from June to November. We know that tornadoes can hit with certain weather conditions. But what do you do with a storm or a natural disaster that hits with no warning? For instance, an earthquake. I grew up in earthquake zones. You never know when an earthquake is going to hit. You don't know how strong it's going to be, but you still have to be prepared. And in life, when we have storms, whether they're figurative or whether they're real life ones like hurricanes and tornadoes, we have to face them. And when we look at the Bible, we see people there who had to face storms, sometimes because of their faith. Sometimes the situation was brought upon because of their own actions. For instance, you remember Samson. He got into a mess because of some bad decisions he made. On the other hand, there were ones like Daniel and the other Hebrews who got into a situation because of their faith. We may have storms like that. The psalmist says, "Lord, my God of salvation, I cry out day and night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry." He is really in dire straits, or really needing God's help. So when storms come our way, they can show us quite a bit about ourselves. Like they can show me the nature of my faith. How strong is my faith? I'll know when it gets tested. They can show me the strength of my commitment. How committed am I to the Lord? Yeah, anybody can be committed while times are good, but what about when things get a little rough? How about the level of my maturity? It'll show me how mature I am, how I handle situations, and then the healthiness of my attitude, and then how teachable am I? And the thing is, remember, when you're dealing with a crisis, a personal storm, remember you are being watched. People are going to see, how does this Christian handle it? Parents, your kids are watching you, how you handle these kinds of things. How are you going to handle it when something goes wrong in a way that would glorify God and bring honor to your Christian faith, or are you going to handle it the way where you're blowing up and you're responding in ways that are just abusive? I want us to think about taking encouragement out of tough times today, whether it be a real storm like we just had or other tough times that we might be going through. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul there says, "We have this treasure in earthen vessels, and that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. We are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus also may be manifest in our body. For we who live are always delivered to death for Jesus' sake, that the life of Jesus may also be manifest in our mortal flesh." Reminded me of a cartoon, Charlie Brown standing on the beach. I tried to actually find this cartoon and I couldn't. But he's standing on the beach, building a sandcastle, and then a wave hits it, and it's gone. And you know how Charlie Brown is. Nothing ever goes right for the poor kid. But he's looking at the sandcastle and he says, or what's left of his sandcastle, "I know there's a lesson in this, but I'm just not sure what it is." And sometimes when things happen like that, there is a lesson that God's trying to teach us. And sometimes we have to look at it, and we can learn really how to respond to storms in life, whether it's a real one or imaginary one. Here's something that a professor one time did in college. What do you see on this? Piece of paper? Huh? Black dot. You see anything else? Okay. That's the first time anyone's ever really come close to that answer. A lot of people see the black dot, they forget that there's the paper around it. And a lot of times when we get into a situation where bad things are happening, what do we look at? The black dot, the problem, the storm. We don't look at what's going on around us. When Peter started sinking, what was he looking at? The water. I'm sinking. He wasn't looking at Jesus, who was out ahead of him. And that's one way to respond when we are in storms, is to look to the Lord, to realize the worth of the anchor, we have to feel the storm. How good is say a football team's game plan? Well, we're not going to find out till they actually step out on the field, aren't we? How good is the general's battle plan before he goes into battle? Well, we're not going to know until the first shot's fired. How really strong is your anchor? We won't know, you won't know until you actually get into a situation where you have to use it. Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do the things which I say? Whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, I will show you whom he is like." Okay, so Jesus, what exactly am I going to be like if I follow and do what you say? Well, he is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against that house and could not shake it, for it was founded on the rock. Anybody know what that rock is in the background? Rock of Gibraltar at the southern tip of Spain. What company uses this as their logo? Anybody know? Prudential Insurance. Why would they use that for their company logo?
So you be safe with it.
You're going to be safe. They want to project an image of strength. That's why they don't have a beach. Try building on sand. Because Jesus went on to say, "He who heard and did nothing is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great." So you've got two different ways to look at it. I'm in a storm, I can keep on the rock here, or I can go down here to the beach onto the sand where nothing's going to stand. He's trying to tell us that everyone is going to have storms. Now, if you listen to the TV preachers, the prosperity gospel, they're going to say, "Oh no, you become a Christian, you're going to be healthy and wealthy. Everything's going to start going your way." You know, I can make some choices and decisions that will make my life better, but you know what? I can't control anybody else around me. I can't control the weather. There's so much about life we can't control. The storms will come our way. Even the house owner, you notice, still had to go through the storm. But the difference was how he built his house, where he built his house. He built his house, I picture it this way, that he took the time to decide the design that was going to be best for where he was building. Where is the best place for me to put the foundation? Oh, here it is, over here on this solid piece of ground, on this rock. Okay, what's the best design that I can get? He's taking his time. This is just what I picture. But the guy building on the sand, oh, we'll just, okay, this looks good. Just put it right here, and that's what we're going to do. We're just going to build right here, and hey, yeah, but you're building on sand. Hey, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And then see what happens when the storm hits. They still had to go through the storm. Remember what Jesus said about the sunshine? Today's a nice sunny day. We can enjoy it. What about our friends here who might be atheists? Aren't they benefiting from the sun too? The storms and the sunshine in life are going to hit us all. Sometimes the Lord, we're told, calms the storm, and sometimes He calms us while the storm rages. You know, so we are still going to go through them. And that's why when I hear the people on the TV or on the radio, and I even sometimes hear well-meaning Christians say the same thing, "Oh, we just don't have any problems." I wish it were true. I wish I could bring somebody in and have a Bible study. They're ready to be baptized, and I could promise them, "Hey, you're not going to have any more problems to worry about." I really wish I could do that, but I can't. Because that pile of bills that was sitting on the kitchen table, they're trying to figure out how to pay. It's still going to be there when they get home. See, Proverbs 10 says, "When the storms of life come, the wicked are whirled away, but the godly have a lasting foundation." We've got something to get us through the storms of life. The NIV says that the storm has swept by, the wicked are gone, but the righteous stand firm forever. See, we've got this foundation that we're on. Are there going to be ups and downs? Yeah, absolutely. We're all going to have to go through. We're all going to have to just deal with those that come our way. There will be tests of our faith. But if you're on that foundation, you can get through it. In fact, I was thinking when I prepared this lesson, and while I was going through and just putting it in its final form, The archaeologists, when they go and they're digging in a particular area and they dig down and then they announce, hey, we found the foundation of a house or a palace or whatever structure. It goes back 1,000 years. The foundation's there. Where's the rest of the house? It's gone. Maybe it was just abandoned and it rotted away. Maybe it was destroyed in war or weather or a combination of those things. But that foundation, it's still there. In fact, we went to the Abraham Lincoln, his boyhood home in Indiana. And there's a cabin there. They've got it bronze, the foundation. And I don't think it was his cabin, but it was one similar to that he lived in that was there in the community. The foundation was still there. They bronze it, and so it'll last, and tourists can come look at it, but the rest of it's gone. That's a good foundation, if it can last that long. And God is still going to be with you. You know, maybe it doesn't feel like it. Power's out, the wind's blowing through. Or it could be that I've just lost my job because there's not enough work, and so the factory's shutting down and it's moving offshore, and I've got this storm that just hit me. Or it could be I was driving home from work, everything was going good. I went through a green light and somebody coming the other way T-boned me, and now I've got 4 or 5 broken ribs and other internal injuries. That's a storm. That'd be like an earthquake. It just hit, unexpected, completely. But we can, when that happens, lean on the strength of God instead of moving away. Notice what he says, what Paul said, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. The vessel is just a container. And notice he said it's a weak vessel. I like pottery. I like the way it looks. You can paint it, it looks really nice. The problem with it is it's pretty fragile. Drop it and see what happens, and then take a metal container or cardboard and drop it, and you get a completely different result. It can break up. But this vessel, being subject to trials and the imperfections like a frail jar of clay, the vessel Paul is talking about is comparing is humans. God chose us. We're pretty frail compared to God, compared to other things, but he chose us to show his glory through. He made us in his image. He didn't make anything else in his image. But he gave us the grace to overcome those imperfections. You know, God's given us what we need, but do we use those tools? Do we read the directions when we need it? Do we rely on or lean on other Christians when we need it, when we find ourselves in storms? God is glorified through these weak vessels. Later on, Paul's going to say, when I am weak is when he is strong. Now remember what he's talking about in 2 Corinthians 12. That's where he talks about that thorn in the flesh. What was his thorn in the flesh? We don't know. A lot of speculation, a lot of guesswork. And really, it's not important that we know the thorn in the flesh, because that misses the entire point when we start debating about what his thorn in the flesh was. His point is that he's got this thorn in the flesh. Why? He says it was to keep him humble. And through that weakness and through that thorn, God can really shine. So in other words, God can take imperfect vessels like me or Paul or whoever, and he can still use me to accomplish great things. He can still use me to do things within his will, within his plan, even though I've got thorns in the flesh myself. In spite of our human weaknesses, God can still work through us. Take David, for instance. Look at all the things he did and all the problems he had, but he was the apple of God's eye. And when I was a kid, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. We didn't go to church. And I would hear occasionally about St. Peter or this saint, that saint, this Bible character, that Bible character. I pictured them as being completely perfect. They didn't have problems. They didn't struggle. But then when I became a Christian and started really reading the Bible instead of listening to what other people were telling me about it, that's when I began to notice, wait a minute, Peter denied Jesus. Peter sank into the water. David committed adultery and then got a man killed to cover it up. Wait a minute. Maybe they weren't so perfect after all. Maybe I don't have to be perfect for God to use me. Maybe God can use me just, as the song says, as I am, which means now I can learn the work of hope when I'm considering all these imperfections, when I'm considering the storms around me. Because Paul goes on to say, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, not even driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed. In other words, he's dealing with a lot, but he's still standing strong. We are hard pressed or troubled on every side, he says, yet we are not distressed. He's admitting he's got problems. I've never heard of too many preachers or elders or deacons who would actually stand before a congregation and say, would you pray for me? I'm having this problem or that problem. There was I personally have only known one elder who actually went before a congregation and asked for prayers. Known of a few preachers, but very few. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of reasons why, but it comes down to it is we humans are afraid to admit weakness. And for me to ask for prayers as well, that's being weak. We are perplexed, he says, but we are not in despair. Paul reminds us that though we may think that we are at the end of our rope, one writer said, remember, we're never at the end of our hope. We can still hang on to that, to the hope that we have in Christ, the hope we have of God helping us, Romans 8:28, and that's another sermon in itself there, about all things working together for us. We're persecuted but not forsaken. It's a racing term that we're using here of an animal overtaking its prey. Paul said, he was being persecuted from all sides. They were coming after him. He's picturing himself being hunted down. And he had a lot of enemies because he was proclaiming the gospel, but he didn't let that stop him. He kept going. He kept pressing ahead. He was struck down or cast down, but not destroyed. He is still moving. God never abandoned Paul. Paul did not lose in the end. He won in the end. He had to sometimes leave town in a hurry, caused a riot or two, but he kept going. He kept pressing on. And that because life does have its struggles, we have to overcome them. Real storms, whether they're real storms like the other day that we had that came blowing through. Now I've got to get these trees cleared. I've got to get my power back on. Oh, got to fix the roof on my house. I've got to do all those things. Or maybe that storm didn't bother you, but I've got this other personal storm. I just got bad news from the doctor. I just got bad news from corporate headquarters that they're closing the office here. Could be any number of things like that where we are troubled on every side. You don't think this cat isn't feeling some trouble here? Where's he going to go? He's surrounded by water in this little, it looks like one of those plastic drawers from one of those little storage things you might have in your house. Troubled on every side. And how many of us have been in situations where we feel like we're just surrounded? Just like this cat. Troubled on every side. One key to success in life is to remember that troubles can come from anyone. And they can come to everyone. Being a Christian doesn't exempt us from it. Jesus, when talking about the two different men who built, one on the solid, one on the sandy foundation, they both had to go through the storm. Periods of drought, well, the Christian farmer has to go through it, as well as the atheist farmer has to go through it. They're going to come to everyone. If you think there are no troubles in life, you're setting yourself up for a fall, because we do have to overcome troubles in life. I really wish I could have my daughter grow up and never have a problem in her life. But no matter how good a job I do as a parent, she's still going to have to deal with them. We're going to have to deal with them as well, because troubles don't come from just one particular source, not just one particular place. Yeah, the devil's there causing us problems. Unfortunately, they can come from financial, from health, and then they can come from what we would say in military terms as friendly fire. Christians sometimes turning on other Christians, and I have seen it happen. It's happened to me where someone didn't get their way in the business meeting, so they're going to create all kinds of problems. Someone, when they're looking for the preacher, didn't get the preacher they wanted, they're going to create more problems there. It does come from every side, and then once you understand, though, that life is not trouble-free, now you've got a correct view of life. It's not going to be trouble-free. I am going to have to deal with them. I am going to have to deal with various storms and things that come through. Doesn't mean that I want anything bad to happen to me or to my loved ones or anything. It's just going to happen. This Clyde Gordon, published in the Triumph magazine, said, "Christ is no security against storms, but he is perfect security in storms. He does not promise an easy passage, but he does guarantee a safe landing." Clyde Gordon, by the way, was a quadriplegic. He was paralyzed from the neck down. So, does your trouble begin to show the hope that lies within you? You know, people, it's been said, are like tea bags. You want to know what they're made of? Put them in some hot water, and you'll see how they are. Which leads us to opportunities in problem times. And this is the thing I try to concentrate on with Bible critics and people maybe who are of weak faith, because when bad things happen, it's an opportunity for us to show God's love. This storm was bad, but it's an opportunity for Christians to come together and show people Christianity in action by helping with relief efforts. For instance, and then you and I personally can draw closer to God when these things happen. We can draw closer to God. We can look at it as, God, thank you for sparing our town. You know, the worst thing that happened here on the church property are the 2 piles of leaves and branches that are out there in the yard. That's pretty good compared to what has happened to other folks that have had to go through this too. So we can draw closer to God and be very thankful to God that we were spared a lot of others. Another thing, it's the potential to build our faith. We can see the laws of nature are working. We can see how the Lord spared us. We can see how the Lord now is giving us an opportunity that we can go out and use it as an opportunity to share God's love with people. We can also, when times are going bad, it gives us an appreciation for the good times. It's no secret, I grew up mostly in cold weather. Spent about 90% of my life, 80 or 90% of my life in climates where winters get really cold. Now, trivia question for you, what's my least favorite season of the year? Anybody want to guess? Trick question, it's winter. I hate the winter. I do not like, I like a little snow at Christmas for a white Christmas, that's it. Other than that, if the temperature goes below 70, that's getting cold for me. I can handle the cold, I just don't like it. But when I get into those cold times, it makes me appreciate the summer and the warm weather so much more. So when we go through a rough time, whether it's a storm, whether it's a long period maybe of unemployment where we can't afford the things we could, doesn't it give us more appreciation for the times when times are going good for us? How do we learn to appreciate those good times if we don't have some bad times? How do I learn to appreciate warm weather if I don't have to go through a blizzard occasionally and shovel 6 feet of partly cloudy off my driveway every couple of years? I haven't had 6 feet all at once, but I've had to do the equivalent of 6 feet after a couple of snow fronts moved through and dumped it 2 or 3 snowfalls on us. But that's how we can build faith. It also produces character. This is where I'm going to see what I am really made of when things go bad. When I go into the doctor after I've had my biopsy and he says, there's about an 80% chance you're going to have cancer when we go in to take the thyroid out. That's what happened about 6 years, just before we had brought Amelia home. I was looking at thyroid cancer. Fortunately, it's another story for another time, but it wasn't. And I can be thankful to the Lord for that. And then remember, this is how we can encourage one another. Maybe I haven't experienced everything in life. There are some things I really have no way to relate to because I haven't had to go through them. I don't know what it's like to deal with PTSD after having been in combat. I've never been in combat. But there are other things in life that I've had to deal with. A cancer scare. I had a teacher at Bible school that when he and his wife years ago were expecting their first child, they were living in a rural area, didn't have very good medical supplies. The baby got breached and the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. But happy ending. The baby ended up being born without a hitch. He's today actually preaching the gospel. He's almost 30. In fact, I think he's past 30 years old. But it wasn't long after their son was born that somebody else in the community had almost the exact same thing with their pregnancy. So they were able to act as kind of a guide, as an encouragement to them. Hey, here's what you need to ask the doctor. Here's what you need to do. Here's the kinds of things you need to prepare for and to look at. They were able to give them some pretty good guidance because they went through something like that. We can learn lessons from problems because they can help us to experience a number of things that nothing else does. You're going into battle. Who do you want leading you into battle? This officer or this NCO over here who's actually been in battle, or this one over here who's only watched training films and seen it in books? Which one do you want to lead you? So if I've got a problem with my health or something like that, where do you think I'm going to go? To the guy over here who's actually gone through the same thing I went through, or one over here who's only read about it and maybe looked up a few articles on the internet? Who's going to be able to give me more real life experiences? And then lessons learned from problems is it gives us greater sympathy and to give comfort to others. Don't you know, you've got a problem you're trying to deal with, and over here is someone who's trying to armchair quarterback you. Well, if that were me in that situation, here's what I would do. Yeah, so you've had to deal with this? No, I haven't, but okay, stop right there. Is there anyone who has dealt with it? And let me get some advice from them. And it should give us a little more sympathy for people who are having to deal with those problems. And then it can help us offer and lending assistance. Giving comfort is simply just being willing to come alongside someone who's suffering various problems and lend assistance. Here, let me help you. Let me help you get your way through all the questions you might need to ask your doctor. Or let me help you make some plans here to deal with this situation, because I've had to deal with it too. We can all do that and help people to go through these times. Giving comfort is just simply lending assistance. And it doesn't necessarily have to involve money or anything like that. It might just involve sitting there and listening to someone's frustration or fear about dealing with this situation. All kinds of ways that you could help. God is, though, going to be at work in our lives, even though the storm is raging. Even though we're on that little tiny boat out there in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, getting flip-flopped around and spun around, and we just don't know if we're going to make it to land. God is still there with us. The trick for you and I is to keep our eyes focused on God. The trick for us is to look at something besides the dot on the paper. To look at what's happening around us. To look at the Lord and the resources the Lord has given us. You may be dealing with a personal storm right now, and the resources you need to deal with it are right there in front of you, but you haven't really looked at them or looked for them because you're more concentrated on the storm. Take a look around. Look to the Lord. Look to the people and resources around you, because I really believe the Lord's going to help us to get through whatever situations we're dealing with, whether it's a real hurricane like Michael or whether it's the many personal storms that we all deal with just in life. So this morning, is your anchor holding, or do you need some help casting that anchor? We'd like to help you, to pray with you, help you with whatever assistance you might need. We'll stand in a minute to sing, as is our custom. Take that time to think about your anchor. Is it holding? Think about whether or not you are dealing with the crises and the problems in life in a way that brings glory to God, or is it in a way that is showing just a strictly human way of dealing with them, with human wisdom instead of God's wisdom. And if we can help you in any way, let us know as together we stand and as we sing.
We're going to sing 643, When Upon Life's Billows. 643.
When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking